My name's Dan. I'm one of the pastors here at Community Church. I'm the oldest pastor here at, yeah, that's right, rocking it. And I say that because I'm the most experienced when it comes to this particular phrase, which is what happy couples know. And I'm super, super excited about this series. I absolutely love talking about marriage. And this is going to be unapologetically a marriage series. So if you're not married in the room, that's okay. And especially if you're like a teenager or you're engaged or something like that, if I had a cookie to give you, I would give you a cookie. Because I used to tell my kids the time to build a storm shelter is not when you see a tornado. And is marriage a tornado? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, it is. So that's what we're going to be talking about for the next 4 weeks. So I'm kind of kicking it off. Seth is going to teach next week and the week after that. And then I'm going to come in and wrap the whole thing up. But I want to start off by talking about the two types of people in marriages that are in the room right now. Because basically we treat our marriage a lot like we treat our cars. I know. But stick with me for just a minute, because a lot of times in our marriages we have, or with our cars, we have the people who are the constant evaluation and maintenance people. You know who you are. You have your oil changed before the recommended time, right? Your spouse walks up to you, you've got the hood up, and they're like, "What's wrong?" And you say, "Nothing. I'm just checking," right? But then there's the rest of you, and the rest of you are the, if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of people. You've never actually seen what's under the hood of your car. There could be gerbils in there on wheels for all you know. All you know is you don't want to work on it. You just want it to work. You don't want to work on it. You just want it to work, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But here's why we think this is so important. Because marriage is a lot like time. Marriage is a lot like money. If you don't pay attention to it, it tends to drift, right? You kind of get that, right? When it comes to time and money, like, where did the time go? Or where did my paycheck go? If you don't pay attention to it, it tends to just kind of wander off. And the same is true with a good, healthy marriage. And we know that even though there's no such thing as a perfect marriage, there are some universal principles that every happy couple knows. Hence, the series that we're doing. So as I introduce the series, I want to just kind of begin with some disclaimers on the front end and talk about a couple of elephants in the room and that kind of thing. The first disclaimer I have is that my job today is to make you uncomfortable. You're welcome. Yeah, my job is to bring up more questions than give answers. So this is what we call in the preaching world the tension. So I'm going to try to build, some of you are like, why did I come to church today? I'm going to try to build some tension today to get you thinking and to get you asking some questions about what a healthy relationship looks like. And then the other kind of thing that I have as a disclaimer is I'm not an expert on marriage. I used to be, and then I got married. Yeah, it's kind of like, you're an expert on parenting until you have kids, and then you see somebody's kid having a meltdown in the grocery aisle, and you're just like, I feel you, girl. Like, I'm feeling what you're feeling right now because I know what it's like. So I used to be an expert on marriage, and then I got married. And so I just want to acknowledge that. The other thing is that what we're going to be talking about for the next 4 weeks is the ideal. In case you don't know this, in case you're not a Christian, and if you're not, that's okay. You're in a good place. I used to be right where you're at. One thing you need to know before you sign up for following Christ is he never, ever lowers the bar. Like ever. Like ever. He never lowers the bar. He always sets a standard that is so amazing and so perfect. And yet, at the same time, he has grace for those of us who never get it 100% right, which is 100% of the people in this room and watching online. So we kind of get that. And then the other thing, kind of an elephant in the room that we want to sort of address is, I know in a group this size, and I preached this message this morning over in Greensburg, it's the same thing. There are people as far as this subject goes, you're all over the map. There are single people in the room. There are engaged people in the room. There are divorced people in the room. And by the way, I'm one of those. My wife and I were both married before we married each other. So this is our second time around. First time we did it our own way. Second time we just decided, well, let's try God's way. And here we are, 33 years coming up next July? Yeah. All right, so, and let me just say this, more in love than I was on the day we got married, and I was stupid in love on that day. So, so this actually works. But we do recognize that there's some of you in this room, your marriage is doing okay, you're doing all right. But let me say this to you, there's more. There's more. You may have been married 40 years and you're just crushing it. There's more. You may be just kind of getting along in your marriage, like you've settled into some sort of amicable agreement and there's no longer blood on, or things like that involved. But there's more for you too. Or, there could be people in the room whose marriage is pretty rough right now. And I get that. Pam and I would tell you that at the beginning of our marriage, especially the first 5 years, didn't know who was, if we were going to come out of that alive. But there is hope. And so that's kind of the other big thing. So if you're here, our hope is if you're here and you're married, you're thinking, at the end of this series, I'm so glad that I was part of that, and we have so far to go. If you're here and you're single, I hope that you'll walk away saying, I'm so glad I heard this now. So let me just start off with why we think it's important to talk about marriage, other than the fact that it's the month of Valentine's Day, which, by the way, I don't care about, but cherry thingalings are the jam. So there's that. And this is the month when at the end of this month, we're doing our marriage retreat, which is sold out, by the way, which we're super excited about that. But beyond that, it really comes down to the fact that we believe that one of the core principles of Christianity, one of the core principles of the way God designed the world to be, is that family is the foundation of every community of faith. And actually, I would kind of say every community in a lot of ways. If you think about it, and you just step back and look at the history of the world, at the history of the people in your life, you'll kind of figure out it's always been about family. That's always kind of been the hub of everything that we do. And because of that, we believe that one of the best things you can do for your family is to strengthen your marriage. In fact, if you're a parent in this room, I'm just going to say this like it's a fact because I think it's a fact. The number one thing you can do for your kids is have a healthy marriage. The number one thing. Now, education, sports, yada, yada, okay, whatever. All those things are great, and all those things are secondary to having a healthy, growing marriage. And let me say this, it's never too late to start. It's never too late to start. It's never too late to embrace the principles that we're going to talk about, because here's what I know. Most of the conversations that I have in my office as a pastor or on the phone or online that are hard and just dripping with difficulty are wrapped up in this whole thing of relationships over and over again. And the sentence that I hear from married couples over and over again is this sentence: I don't know how we got here. I don't know how we got here. Because nobody shows up at the altar thinking, man, I hope this ends in a nasty divorce one day. Nobody does that, right? Who signs up for that? But over time, it happens because, and here's why I think this happens, it's because we don't understand what marriage is. We don't understand what marriage is designed for, and because our culture has taught us that the point of marriage is to make us happy. Because here's what happens. We all show up to our marriages with a crate full of our hopes and dreams and desires, right? We all show up with this in some way or another, like when it comes to money, for example. We all show up thinking like in the video, we're going to have 2 incomes and it's going to be great and I can just buy as many pairs of shoes as I want. That's not just for ladies, by the way. I know some of you dudes out there, you have a shoe addiction or whatever, and I can just buy whatever I want. And then there's the other person in the marriage that shows up and says, oh, no. That's not what money's for. That's not how we treat money. We budget for things and we save for things until we can afford it. I mean, if you can't afford it, you don't deserve it. And so we show up with that kind of stuff, right? We have an idea of what kind of house we're going to live in. Oh, we're going to live out in the country. And oh, no, we're not. We're going to live close to town. Or, oh, I'm a hoarder. I keep everything. Oh, no, I can't stand clutter, that kind of stuff. So we show up with that kind of thing. And this is the kind of car I'm going to drive. Men are always like, yeah, when I'm married, I'm going to have this sweet car. And then you end up in this little minivan, okay? Man, can I just say this? And women, just make friends with it, okay? Minivans are okay. They're great. They're cool. They're awesome. I loved my minivan. I miss my minivan. It's just, anyway, all right, I'm moving on, having a little moment there. And then there's like cleaning the house. We're going to share everything. We're going to, clean together and all that kind of thing, except I don't really do toilets or anything outside the house. Like that's all, not my domain. And then diapers, not so much. But we're going to share everything, absolutely. And speaking of that, diapers, we're going to have a baby. Ooh, it's going to be so cute. It's just going to be like a mini me. But then it turns out not to be the same gender as the one that you hoped for. So then you have another baby. And then you're like, well, let's go for a basketball team. Let's just keep going here. Or then there's something like your time. You come to the altar with an idea of how you're supposed to use your time, right? So when you get home from work, you're like, I just want to veg and watch TV. And when she gets home from work, she just wants to talk. And you're just like, no, just give me 20 minutes or whatever. Or maybe he's that way. He's just like, that kind of thing. And so you're like, yeah, but when I have free time, which by the way, there's no such thing. When I have free time, I'm going to go hang out with my friends and you can go hang out with your friends. Oh, no, we have our friends. Not your friends, not my friends. Then there's the calendar, right? Like how are we going to spend our holidays? Christmas, we have to go to my mom and dad's. No, Christmas, you stay home. Well, it's not Christmas unless we go to Nana's on Christmas Eve. Who's Nana? What? Well, when are we going to go to my parents' house? Well, they can have Flag Day. And we'll just go with that. And then there's this weird one. There's this one weird expectation that is not true for women as much as it is for men, as far as I can tell. But men have this weird expectation when they come to the altar of how their wife is going to dress when she goes to bed at night. And then it ends up this. And and she's like, well, he wants me to be warm and comfortable. And he's like, dang, that is not what I was thinking. And then there's this. So how do we resolve I was looking for boxing gloves, but I could only find this wrestling belt thing or whatever. But there's a real difference in how she and her family of origin dealt with conflict and how you dealt with conflict in your family. In her family, they just yell and scream, cut each other off, and then, they work it all out and get it all done. And in your family, you're just like, no, we never speak disrespectfully to each other. We never cut each other off. We sit down. We talk about it. And we pray through it. But the point is, everybody comes with one of these, right? Everybody comes with one of these to the altar. Everybody comes with all these hopes and dreams and desires. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with any of that, actually. And some of those, like I said, come from your family of origin. Some of those might be things that God planted in your heart. So there's not anything wrong with that. But most of them come from this, that we are either trying to avoid something or recreate something. Most of the time, the things that we have with our hopes and our dreams and our desires come out of, oh, no. When I get married, it's going to be different. Or you saw your parents, you saw your grandparents holding hands when they were 70, and you were like, that. I want to recreate that. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. But here's the problem. The problem comes when we come to the altar with our hopes and our dreams and our desires, and we hand them to our spouse and say, make them come true. Here, these are yours now. And what happens when we do that is so destructive for the design of marriage. Because what we've done is we've converted our hopes and our dreams and desires into expectations. You have to carry this now, not me. These are the expectations I have for you. And suddenly this light crate of hopes, dreams, and desires becomes a really heavy burden for someone else. And the first clue that this is not God's design for marriage is the fact that these are my hopes and my dreams and my desires. It's all about I. And everybody in this room knows this, that when eyes collide, we loses. Every coach knows this, right? That when eyes collide, we loses. But listen, wasn't we the goal? Right? Think about that. I just want somebody I can do life with. We're going to do life together. We're going to grow old together. We're going to love each other. So where did we go wrong? It's the opposite of how God designed marriage to be. It's not wrapped up in I. So if my marriage isn't about me and my hopes and dreams and desires, then what is it about? Well, that is actually a really good question that most couples never ask. What's the point? Why are we here? And it's basically, by the way, the same question that Jesus was asked by the religious leaders of his day. So one day Jesus was walking down the road, a bunch of people or whatever, disciples are like hanging out behind him, trying to figure out what he's talking about like 50% of the time. Anyway, and so they're walking along and these religious leaders are quizzing Jesus and asking him about marriage and about divorce, specifically about divorce. And so then Jesus says this, and right when they want, give me the rules, give me the list, give me the expectations, Jesus instead talks about the design of marriage, which, that's what Jesus does. He's like, oh, you have a question? Here's my question for your question. Anyway, so here's what he says about marriage. He says, haven't you read, and of course it's a question, that at the beginning, the Creator made them male and female and said, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and will be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is like a quote from the Old Testament about the design of marriage. And so Jesus is reminding them, this is the way God built it to be. And then verse 6, he says, so they are no longer two, but one flesh. Are you picking up on a theme here? And then he goes on and continues to talk about this concept where he says, therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. He's talking about the design of marriage here. Notice the theme that he repeats 4 times in 3 verses. He says, united, one flesh, joined together. Jesus is saying, look, you want to know about the rules of marriage and who's responsible for what, but when you're asked those questions, you're missing the entire point. That marriage isn't about making each other happy or fulfilling each other's needs or procreation or any of that kind of stuff. Those are all side effects, and they're not bad. The goal of marriage is not happiness. It's oneness. It's oneness. That the best of you and the best of me make a better we. Here's what you know, and it's the same thing when you have kids, by the way, because you're like, someday maybe we'll have kids or whatever, and you think you know, but then you have a kid, and oh my gosh, doesn't it just change your entire world? And the same thing happens when we get married. When we pursue unity, your hopes and dreams and desires are not the point. We are the point of marriage. That although on your own, you're a complete person and you can be perfectly happy and be single, but when we pursue a unity, we realize this marriage isn't really about me. It's about we. that if you do marriage selflessly with the goal of oneness, you'll discover something better than individual happiness. Not that that's bad. This is just better. It's better. And it's so hard, which is why so few people go down this path. My wife and I, as I said, have both been married before. We did it the other way. We did it a selfish way. And then we tried doing it God's way. I just remember the day when I said to her, look, I don't know that I necessarily believe everything God says about marriage. I don't know that I necessarily agree with the way that he says to do things, but I've done it my way. So let's try that. And so from the beginning, we just decided that this is how we're going to do marriage. And one of the things that you'll figure out really soon when you pursue this is what I believe is the preeminent characteristic, or one of the preeminent characteristics of a Christ follower. And it's a super simple concept that nobody's good at. Ready? It's this: you before me. You before me. When's the last time you said that, much less did that in your marriage? You before me. And again, just so you know, this applies to all relationships if you count yourself as a Christ follower. You want to have a great friendship? Put them before you. You want to have a great relationship with your boss? Put your boss before you, instead of demanding that it's fair. Like that's a thing. It really comes down to this. It really does come down to this, that as long as your relationships, the point of your relationships is you're missing the point. You're not in a relationship. You're not being relational. You're just being selfish. And nobody wants to hear that. And nobody wants to live that way, right? And yet, here we are over and over again. When I talk to young couples about this concept, I always talk to them about the difference between a contract and a covenant. A contract and a covenant. A contract says if then, right? And not only, by the way, are contracts unfulfilling, they have an ending date. They're short-lived most of the time. Usually a contract says, if you do this, I'll do that. If you keep your end of the bargain, I'll keep my end of the bargain. And when we approach marriage as a contract, we usually react in one of two ways, and we're going to talk about these for just a couple of minutes. The first one is we react by settling. We just settle, right? We get tired of trying because it seems that no matter how hard we try, we're always playing catch up. In a contract, that's what it's about. You do this, I'll do that. That's because a marriage built on expectations creates this kind of relationship. It's a debt-debtor relationship. Think about it and you'll know this is true. This is the kind of marriage that is 100% based on expectation. It uses language like, well, he was supposed to, or you were supposed to, or you owe me this. And it's a no-win scenario. This is why I often hear from couples, I feel like I can never win. Or no matter what I do, it's not good enough. Because it's never going to be good enough. Because you never actually get ahead. Listen, even if you meet every single expectation on one day of your life, and not like that will ever happen, but even if you did, you're not winning, you're just not losing, right? So think about this. That's not love. That's just a transaction. It's debt-debtor. It sets us up for what I call the 4 C's of a dysfunctional relationship. So if you want to know how to have a dysfunctional relationship, you're in the right place today. I'm going to tell you. So here's how you have a dysfunctional relationship. Number 1 on that list is convince. So when we get married or whatever, and we have all these expectations that are butting heads or whatever, there's usually one personality. It's a little stronger than the other personality, and they usually say something kind of like this, but not exactly like this, where they say, come on, honey. Let's just take a look at your hopes and dreams and desires. They're cute. But mine, they're just better. Like the way that I do money, the way that I do conflict, the way that I do, all this other stuff that's in my hopes and dreams, that's just the better way to do it. And so we convince our spouse to drop theirs for ours. It's debtor, right? Or we convict. This is where one person uses guilt or shame. If they would just, if she would just get her poop in a group, we'd be just fine. Take a second on the poop in a group thing. You're going to need it. So yeah, right? We'd be just fine. But isn't that just debt and debtor as well? So we convict or we control. This is when one person just powers up and just wears them down. They use guilt. They use bullying in some form or another, and just to get their way. And again, the bigger personality wins. So they control their way. And then the last one, of course, is compromise, which actually it should say unhealthy compromise, because there is healthy compromise, but unhealthy compromise starts with a U, and that would screw up the whole 4C thing, and that's just dumb. So I went with compromise right here. So here's what I mean by that. There is unhealthy compromise, and then there's healthy compromise. Unhealthy compromise will require you to empty your box for the other person. They will require you to take all your hopes and dreams and push them aside. And you both do it. You both do it. And so these things that God has planted in your heart, these things that you know that you're wired for, you're just asked to set those aside. You just go along to get along, right? So that's the first response to a contract relationship, is to settle. The second one, of course, is the obvious one, and that is we just quit. We just quit. And I get this. I did this. Because there seems to be no way out, right? We just leave. And why not? You can't win anyway. I'll never be good enough. Did you know, by the way, that that's the number one reason that teenagers run from home? The number one thing they say is, I just couldn't win. I just couldn't be good enough. And by the way, quitting a marriage doesn't necessarily mean a divorce. You can quit in your heart. Why? Because the contract is unfillable. But, and that's enough about contract marriage. Now we're going to talk about the opposite of that, and that is a covenant marriage. And by the way, never too late to switch to this. Never too late to begin switching to this, because it's a lifelong thing, right? This is the opposite of debtor. Right? If a contract marriage basically says, I love you if you do this or when you do that, a covenant marriage says, I love you, period. I love you, period. I made a covenant between you and me and our Creator. And that is the basis of our marriage. Not what you do, not what I do. See, God models this for us throughout Scripture. It's as plain as the nose on my face, which is, it's got a honker. Anyway, so God makes a covenant with us, right? With his people over and over and over again. And what do? They goof it up over and over and over again. How many times does God break his covenant with his people? Never. Not one single time. So if the question of and here it is, if you tuned out or if you're like, you went to the bathroom or whatever, you're watching online, whatever, this is the time to zoom in. I said all that other stuff to say this. If the question in a contract marriage or a covenant marriage is, what does my spouse owe me? A covenant marriage answers that question with this: nothing. Nothing. So let me just say this as clearly as I can. Your spouse is not responsible for your happiness. They're not. They didn't give you these hopes and dreams and desires, so expecting them to carry it for you is just selfish. And that's because of this. And this is such a counterintelligent concept. But if you get your head around this and you start living your relationships like this, I'm telling you, they will explode with joy. And here's the concept. Happy couples know this. They know that they owe each other everything, but deserve nothing in return. They know that they owe each other everything, but deserve nothing in return, which makes no sense, right? Which is why I think Paul refers to marriage as a mystery. Think about it, and you'll know this true for the happiest couples you know. They never trash each other, do they? Right? They always feel like I got the better end of the deal. They're grateful for their spouse. Guys, I have no idea why Pam picked me. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And I feel like I owe her absolutely everything. But I feel like I deserve nothing in return. And here's what's really surprising about that. She feels the same way about me. Crazy. That's because happy couples know that they owe each other everything and deserve nothing in return. And the reason this is a concept for Christian marriages is because of the word Christian. It's because we take our cues for our relationships, or at least we're supposed to, from Jesus himself. Listen to what the Apostle Paul said about relationships. He basically said, here's how you do relationships if you call yourself a Christian. He said, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. Whoa, what is that, Paul? Well, thanks for asking. He says, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. And then he goes on, and here it is again. He says, rather, he made himself what? Nothing, by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Jesus deserved everything, but made himself nothing. You know what this is, right? This is the ultimate you before me. The ultimate you before me. And when we do this, when we start to love one another as Christ loved us, here's what's going to happen, and you're probably going to hate it. It becomes a submission competition. A submission competition. I'm going to work as hard as I can work to submit my life. My primary thought is not how can I make my hopes and dreams and desires come true, but how can I make hers come true? So then the question becomes, so then what do I do with my hopes, dreams, and desires? Well, I'm glad you asked. That's where Seth's going to pick it up next week. But before we go to I won't leave you completely hanging, right? Before we go today, let me just give you some homework. And by the way, this is for you. This is not for your spouse. So the whole elbow or did you hear what he said? That kind of thing. No, let's not go there. In fact, don't even talk about the sermon in the car. Don't even do it because you're just going to get in trouble. So here's what you do. Here's what I want you to do. Two things. And it's all internal. It's not hard. So the first one is just this. What are my hopes and dreams and desires? Have you ever thought about this? Right? Have you maybe just write them down? What are my hopes and dreams and desires? And again, those are not bad things. Then the second question is, am I expecting somebody else to carry those around? Have I converted them to expectations and placed them on someone else's shoulders? And that's where we'll pick it up next week. Let me just say this to you before we close. There's a thing that happens when you give God your life, and then on top of that you say, I want to serve you wherever, and he calls you to be a pastor. What happens is he places a burden in your heart for the people that are in your community. And so last thing I want to say to you today is not something I have written in my notes, and people back there are going, where is he talking about? But I want this for you so badly. so badly. Been to the other side of this, done it all completely my way, and then I've been living for the past 32 years what it's like to do it God's way, and I want this for you so badly. So just know that your church, and when I say church, it's all y'all here and in Greensburg, and especially your staff, we're praying that you would discover some of the secrets that happy couples know. So let me pray for you right now. Father, for those who are watching online, for those who are in the room today, some of this, it seems so plain and so obvious and so simple, and yet, oh my gosh, when we're confronted with it this way, when we hold it up to your word, when we hold it up to your standard, it's just, we figure out that we've got so far to go. But that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. So God, I pray for every couple in this room right now, whether they've been married 1 year and even for the single folks in this room, that we would figure out this preeminent concept of what it means to follow you. And that is a race to the back of the line. It's you before me, over and over and over again. So let us not forget that. Help us to begin to embrace that. And God, I lift up every marriage here, that we would grow into something healthier, not for our own benefit, but for those around us, for our communities, and mainly for our spouse. We love you. It's in Christ's name we pray these things. Amen.